Oh, didn't see you there. Hi, I'm Mr. Holmes Williams, your AP Computer Science Principles teacher here at the Gwinnett School of Math, Science, and Technology. Well, since you're here, let's talk about a huge component of the AP CSP AP exam, which is your create task. Let's go to the board. And to the board we appear. So welcome inside of my beautiful classroom. We have desks, we have chairs, we have a sink. We'll never use that, but it's there. And we have this big, beautiful board. Let's talk about the AP Computer Science Principles Create Task. So what is the Create Task? You might be thinking inside of your head right now. Well, the AP Computer Science Create Task is a task that is worth 30% of your final AP exam grade. So 70% of your exam is going to be based off of multiple choice questions that you answer during the 2-hour exam window at the end of our AP class in the spring. And 30% of that exam comes from a program that you create using one of many different programming languages that you may or may not be taught in computer science principles. And that is, again, 30% of your grade. So in this class, we're teaching you 2 programming languages. We'll be teaching you JavaScript and we'll be teaching you Python. Okay? And so you can choose one of those languages to create a program that satisfies the following requirements for a Create Task program. The Create Task program that you create should have all of the following. It should have a user input. It should have an output. It should have a function which takes a user input. It should also have selection, which is an if-else statement. It should have an example of sequencing, meaning, you're going through this in a sequence. It should also have iteration, meaning that it has loops, while loops, for loops, etc. And finally, it should also include a list. So somewhere inside of your program, of your create task needs to have a list that is accessed within the function or procedure that you create that takes user input and that outputs something to your user, and that list should be used within there. If your create task does not meet all of these requirements, then you are going to lose up to 30% of your final AP exam, which is a lot of points, right? So make sure that you're following along. Let's take a short break really quickly. And we are back. I had to take a little bit of a water break. My mouth was getting a little clammy. Anyways, we did want to open up the floor for some questions. So does anyone in the room have any questions about the create task thus far?
Yes, Johnny.
Yes. When do we complete the AP create task? Do we do it like at home or do we do it here? Beautiful question. Thank you, Johnny. So what Johnny asked was, when do we actually complete the create task? So the create task is completed in class, and optionally it can be completed at home as well. So within our class time, towards the end of the school year, when we're about to take our AP exam, you're going to have at least 9 hours to complete your create task within class. And then if you would like to work on it outside of class, you can, but we always give you a minimum of 9 hours in class so that you can feel confident that you are doing well on your assignment. And while you are in class, actually, you are able to collaborate with your fellow student, okay? Now, every single person in this classroom has to submit a unique, individualized create task program, right? I don't want people submitting the same code or having very similar concepts, but you are allowed, if you would like, to get help from each other. I cannot help you, right? I am just observing and I'm just making sure you have everything, but I cannot give feedback on or comment on your code or whatever you are doing. But you all can give each other feedback because you all are going to be excellent programmers by the end of this class to to then be able to help each other have a stellar performing create task program. So let's go ahead and get started with an example, right? A program that you could use for your create task, which you shouldn't, but I'm gonna give you an example of it anyways, is a password checker, okay? So we live in an age where passwords are getting cracked. Large corporations are getting leaks. Their data leaks. Your data is getting leaked from them. And so we want to check and make sure that everyone's password is a strong password, right? So the plan is to have a function, right? Have a function that has one parameter, and that parameter is a password. And this is our user input into that function. So a user inputs a password and then it passes through our function. And then our function checks if that password is weak, unacceptable, or strong. The first thing that it checks to see is if the password is unacceptable, okay? Now, what would be an example of an unacceptable password class? Johnny again, yes.
An unacceptable password is one that's like really easy to crack, like 000 or chicken nuggets.
Wonderful, thank you, Johnny. Yes, so unacceptable passwords are those passwords that a baby could probably crack, right? Think of your admins, your users, your 12345. Think of your 1234556, your 0000, your 1111. These are all really silly easy passwords, and you should never, ever use these. And so the way that you would know if the user inputted a unacceptable password would be by having a list, which is where our list comes in for our create task, of unacceptable passwords. Let's go and just code out that first part really quickly over here. So we have just written our first bit of our Python code. Now, how do you know this is Python? Well, if you look up here, we have this little bit right here that gives you a hint. It says main.py, and that pi is short for Python. Now, you can create this program inside of JavaScript. However, we are choosing Python. It is a lot more readable, and it's easier to follow along. So what I've done here is, before I have created or defined my own personal function, which in this case is password check, I've created a variable right before it called password, and I have given it the value of input. And so what this means is that whenever we use password, it is going to be the inputted password that our user inputs into our program. And so then once we go to the next line, we have defined password check, and we have taken our variable that we've assigned the value of the input that our user inputs as our parameter. And so we're going to run that through our password checker to see if it is an unacceptable, a weak, or a strong password. Now, some of these variables, like the ones down here, we're not going to use yet, so we're not going to talk about them quite yet. However, the one we are going to be using right now is going to be this variable called the unacceptable passwords variable. We've assigned it a list. How do we know it's a list? Well, it has these beautiful square brackets at the beginning and at the end, and all of the values in the list are separated by a comma, and every value is a string, which you know it's a string because it has these quotes in it. And so these are all unacceptable passwords. These come from a website called NordPax, which is a software company. They primarily make VPNs, but they do make other types of softwares. And so these were all identified as very easy to crack and very easy to hack passwords. So password 123456, QWERTY, admin, welcome, login. These are all very easy passwords, and these are thus those unacceptable passwords that if you put this into that if you input this into our program, well, we're going to say, hey, that's unacceptable. And we do that down here. So if the password, remember, that's the password that they input into our function, is in, so there's an invisible is here, is in unacceptable passwords, then it will print out this string so that the user can see it, and it prints out password. So the password that they inputted, it will show them what it was, is an unacceptable password. Please try again with a less common, stronger password. All right, we will continue this in the next bit.
And we're back. All right, so we just coded the first couple of lines of our program. So we have our lists, we have our call or defining of our function with our parameter, which is of course our input, which we have already sorted out. And we inputted our very simple if statement to be able to check if that password that the user inputted is in the list passwords that are unacceptable. Okay, beautiful job, you guys. So next we're going to check to see if the password is a weak password. Okay, so a weak password is simply a password that is less than 12 characters or has 11 characters or less. In this day and age, we need passwords that are long. I know it's frustrating. I understand we have 1 billion passwords and 1 billion services that we have to sign into, but we have to make sure that we have passwords that are at least hard to crack. And the more characters that you have in a password, the better. So in this case, the number is 12 characters or less. That is a weak password. Not unacceptable, but weak. So let's quickly program that now.
All right, so we have just added in our elif or our else if statement to our program. Pretty simple part here, and so we're just adding on to what we already have. So the way that this program works is that it goes through these line by line. So the first line, it checks if the password that the user inputted is an unacceptable password, meaning that it is in this list up here. If it is not an unacceptable password, then we must check to see if it is a weak password. And remember that we talked about a weak password being a password that is less than 12 characters. So if the length, and this is the length function here in Python, if the length of password is less than 12, then that means that it is a weak password. And so instead of saying to the user, hey, your password is unacceptable, please use a less common, stronger password, we'll instead tell them, hey, your password is weak, not unacceptable, but weak. And so please use a password with more than 12 characters. All right, that's it for this part.
And we're back. So far we have defined our function, right? And now we have our two if and else if statements, which is going to be checking for our unacceptable passwords and checking for our weak passwords. And the final thing we have to check, or our else statement, is just our strong password. And this is where we're going to use some of that iteration to kind of loop through our strong passwords that are more than 12 characters and that are, of course, not unacceptable. And we're going to simply tell the user, hey, you have a strong password. And also, here is what makes your password strong. It contains this amount of letters, this amount of numbers, and this amount of special characters. So let's go and code out and let's see what our program can really do. Come on, let's go.
And here we have our completed password checker program. Congratulations, you all. Let's go through this step by step at a very high level. So we have a variable called password, and we are taking a user input and they're inputting a password to be checked. We have defined a function called password check, or a procedure, as you might see on the AP exam, and it's passing in that same variable that is an input that the user input. So we have already checked off having a function or procedure, they're the same thing.
We've also checked off it having one parameter, and we've also checked off it having a user input. Beautiful job. Right after that, we have checked off another thing we need for our create task, which is having a list. So we have a variable that has a list in it. In this case, is going to be a list of unacceptable passwords, and then that's great. Now, the reason why we initialize these variables as well is because when we get to our else statement, which is that statement that runs only if the password is not weak and it is not unacceptable, we're going to be using these to check every single character in the password that the user inputs to see if it's a special character, a lowercase character, a number, or an uppercase letter. So we've got our variables that have special characters in it, that has uppercase characters in it, and that has numbers in it. And so this is going to be what we're actually checking those against. Okay, so now we get into really the meat of our program, and it's pretty simple, right? So we have our beautiful selection. So selection is our if, else, or elif statement. So our first if statement, it checks if the password that we've been inputted is inside of our unacceptable passwords, and if it is, then it will say, hey, this is an unacceptable password. If it is not unacceptable, then it will check if it is weak. If it is weak, meaning that it has less than 12 characters, then it will then return this statement saying that it's a weak password. Please use a password more than 12 characters. And then finally, what we just did was we have an else statement. So the else statement basically says, if all else fails, this is what runs. So if the password is not unacceptable and if the password is not weak, then clearly it has to be strong. And we've made sure of that, okay? And so here, this is where we have what we call an iteration. This is a for loop. And what this for loop is doing, it is looping through every single character inside of the password. So this for char in password. So for every character in password, we're checking if the character is a special character, if the character is an uppercase letter, if the character is a number, and if it is not a uppercase letter, a special character, or a number, then it has to be a lowercase letter, right? And so that's why this else statement is basically the other condition. And so it'll loop through every single different character in the password, and then it will basically count, right? So if it is a special character, it will add to our special count. Remember that our special count, a number count, lower count, and upper count are all starting at 0. But as it goes to this function, what this basically says is if it is meeting these requirements, then it's gonna add 1 to that particular variable, okay? And then finally, we have this huge print statement that's saying, hey, the password you inputted, remember this is an F string, meaning it's going to take the password that they inputted and show it to the user, is a strong password that has length. So remember, we used length earlier, so it'll tell you how many total characters it has, because the length function tells you the amount of characters inside of a string. And it contains, and again, we have our special count, upper count, num count, and lower count. So it contains a certain number of special characters, a certain number of uppercase letters, a certain number of numbers, and a certain number of lowercase letters. Great job. And then we have to essentially run this. So we've talked about this in the past, so hopefully you know this, but of course indentation is very important inside of Python, and so you'll see I'm very intentional with where I indent, and so we have to run this code, but we can't run it with it's indented, because if it's indented, that means it will run with the other conditions that we don't want to. We're running this outside of our function, so it's on the same line as this, and then we have our running of the function. So let's go ahead and run this, and let's see how this bad boy looks down here. So I'm gonna run this, and it is taking forever, I don't know why. So I'm gonna type in a common password. I'm gonna type in welcome, or an unacceptable password. And so here, welcome was in that list of unacceptable passwords, and so as you can see, it says welcome is an unacceptable password. Please try again with a less common, stronger password. Beautiful, exactly what we wanted. Let's run it again. Now I'm going to use a password, just any random, but I'm going to make sure it's less than 12 characters. That looks like less than 12 characters. I'm going to enter. Oh, actually that has 12 characters. Okay, so let me run this again and make sure it has less than 12. Enter. Now it says that this password is a weak password. Please use a password with more than 12 characters. Great. And now we can do what we just did. I'll use some special characters in there as well to make it spicy, and some uppercase letters. There you go. press enter, and now it says this huge password, which I'm not going to read, is a strong password that has 22 total characters and contains 3 special characters, 2 uppercase letters, 4 numbers, and 18 lowercase letters. And if you look at here, you can see the 2 uppercase letters are correct. We have 1, 2, 3 special characters, which is correct. And then the numbers, again, we can look at that. That's all correct. And so again, this is your password checker, and this has all of the requirements. It has user input, it has user output, it has a function that has a parameter, it has iteration, which is our for loop here. It has selection, which is going to be our if-else statements, and it has lists. It has all the requirements. So if you were to submit this as your create task on the AP exam, well, you would have a great chance of getting all 30 of the points that you would need for the create task. All right, let's go back to the computer and let's end this thing.
Ooh, oh, and there you have it, kids. We have created our create task for our AP Computer Science Principles exam. Remember to submit this code without any comments to your AP classroom and check with your teacher before you're submitting everything. How'd everyone do? Johnny? Johnny, you gotta wake up. Did you get any of that?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, AP great task.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I see something on your paper. Huh. Well, anyways, thank you all for learning with me. Hopefully this was insightful. Hopefully you learned some more about Python and you learned how to break down difficult projects or difficult functions or difficult concepts and learning how to take it step by step, you know? The pyramids weren't built in a day, and neither will your knowledge of Python. So keep on learning, y'all. Have a great day.